you can listen to the stories that your fear tells you, but take responsibility for the fact that you are the one who acts based on those stories. If you listen to this podcast or any other podcast or read a book or anybody you admire and you go, well, they could do it, but I can't do it. That is a story that fear is telling you. And we need to listen to what fear says because it's a wound and it's usually just trying to protect us in some way, in a short-term kind of way. But in the long term and the gains you want to get in your life, take responsibility for the fact that you are the one who decides if that story is true.
Powerful words from our next guest, Kate Swoboda. My name is Sarah Williams and I'm the host of the Tough Girl Podcast. The Tough Girl Podcast is sponsorship and ad-free, and that's thanks to the monthly financial support of patrons. To find out more about supporting your favourite podcast and becoming a patron, please check out Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. There's currently over 220 patrons who are supporting the mission to increase the amount of female role models. Take action now and become one of them. All patrons will get their name on a dedicated patrons page on the Tough Girl website, and all female patrons $5 and above are invited to join the closed Facebook group, the Tough Girl Tribe. Now let's go on and speak with Kate. Kate teaches people how to change old patterns of self-doubt and create courageous habits, and in turn, a courageous life. She does this by using the principles of habit formation. I'll let Kate tell you more.
I'm the author of the book, The Courage Habit. You can find me at Your Courageous Life or Team CLCC. But more importantly, I'm a bit of an endurance geek, which is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to be here. Have a couple half-Ironman triathlons under my belt, some ollies, some sprints. Do the yoga thing, currently obsessed with CrossFit. And today my resting heart rate is 51. All the important stats, right? So.
Oh my God, loving it. Have you always been an endurance geek?
No, it was just never really something that my parents valued. It wasn't like they were against it or something, but like they were readers, they were bookworms. So that was kind of the form of entertainment. There was never a, hey, do you want to do soccer lessons? Tried out ballet lessons as many little girls do, but it wasn't like this passion that I had for it. And I think by grade school, it was like I was not the fastest. I didn't have a natural proclivity for sport, so it just never became a thing. And then when I got older, I started running, and that was kind of my gateway into sort of seeing sports and endurance as this a test of will, I guess you could say, a test of character. And I started to really like how it felt to feel like I couldn't go farther, yet go farther. And then kind of what that aroused in me around pride and feeling like, wow, there's something beyond just the physicality of this. There's something mental here, and that got really exciting. And then now I feel like I'm just all in, because now it's just like, oh my God, this is, we live in the age of Google Scholar, and you can look up like the current experiments they're doing on fast and slow twitch muscle fibers and stuff like that. So that's the, I guess, short answer. I could go on and on, obviously.
So running, you said running was your gateway. What made you start running?
Unfortunately, fear that I was going to be, air quotes, fat, like teenage, self-consciousness about my body, and, just this perception that, well, runners are never fat, overweight, and I don't use these words today as judgments of other people. And I realize how damaging and hurtful those words and those terms are. But, at 16 years old, growing up in the middle of Missouri, it was, I need to make sure that I don't gain weight. I need to be pretty. I need, it's pretty typical high school stuff. So I started getting into running, and I think that something flipped for me the first time I ever ran a mile without stopping, because I remember several months I would go to this park that had a mile loop. And I just, I would, pretty typical for a runner starting out, you're running and your heart starts hammering and it just starts to feel like I just can't, I have to walk. And, months and months and months. And I would try to get as far as I could before that feeling would come over me of I have to walk. And the first time that I ever actually made it through a full mile without having to take a break, I felt so proud of myself. So I think that was the beginning of the switch flipping. And I'd say that going through the rest of high school and into college, running was still this kind of thing that I just wasn't very consistent with. It was my go-to exercise. It's so easy. You can do it anywhere, grab a pair of shoes and just go. And I found that I liked the feeling of pride. I liked, in particular, after a run, the feeling of my body cooling itself down. There's something very alive to me about that feeling of, your heart is still pounding and all the systems are kind of trying to make sense of what you've just put yourself through. And there's just this real sense of peace. And then as I got older, it became about stress management. And that all worked really, really well until I overdid it. And very unexpectedly, when I was about 24, 25 years old, I was out for a run one day and suddenly could not walk. And it wasn't like a sprain. It wasn't like a, sudden impact. It was just like the bottom of my foot just hurt. And I went in and I got the x-rays. It's not a stress fracture. Nobody could figure out what it was. And it took forever to finally find a doctor who wasn't just kind of dismissing it as, oh, it's either all in your head or I don't know, it could just be something that'll resolve. Turns out, I didn't know this, genetically, I'm hypermobile. And there's a bone in the bottom of my foot, in the bottom of everyone's foot. It's called the cuboid. And this bone is one that many of the muscles and tendons and things of that nature interact with for you to just simply walk. And that bone had been slightly dislocated. And that was why I was feeling so much pain. But because I was hypermobile, or I am hypermobile, when that bone would get reset, there was too much mobility throughout my body and especially in my foot, and the bone would just dislocate again. So there was a period of about 6 to 8 months where I could not run and frankly could not really walk. I was a college professor at the time, and when I would arrive on campus, I would have to go over to disabled students programs and services and pick up one of those motorized scooters just to get around campus and to teach my classes. And it was humbling. It was really, really hard.
How did you get through that time period?
Oh, well, not very well at first. At first, it was very, and this is where we get into, like, when I think about what people's fear patterns are, I think that we tend to deal with fear in pretty habituated ways. And a big fear pattern that's shown up in my life has been one of perfectionism, which I think is often about control. So at first, it was 2 months of not going to the doctor after I couldn't walk, right? Like, because I don't need a doctor. What are they going to tell me? They're just going to tell me to ice it and rest it. Then go to the doctor and then, holy shit, and they don't even know what's going on. They can't even just give me an easy diagnosis of here's what's going on. So then I start going to doctors and then I'm kind of scared straight and I'm like, okay, so I'm sitting up and I'm listening and I'm going to go to every appointment you tell me to go to. And I got cortisone injections and I had PT and I actually had my foot put into a cast at one point because everything was failing. So the idea was, let's put it into a cast and that will completely immobilize it and force things to stay where they are. Turns out for someone who's hypermobile, that can make the problem even worse because being in a cast will weaken all the other muscles that would otherwise stabilize the cuboid and that area. And by the way, like anybody who's ever had a cuboid thing, like it's so frustrating because it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So it's like I would kind of get to a point where I could walk again. And then for reasons that I couldn't figure out at the time that were all due to the hypermobility, then it was, a couple steps back. So I'm trying all these things. I'm raging. I'm furious. I'm it was this profound experience, I think, of opening to more compassion, because I had people treating me as disabled. And I was, for all intents and purposes, for that period of my life. And I could see how people would treat me differently, or I could see how so much of the world is not really set up to accommodate people who have disabilities, how hard it is to get around, things like that. So it was super, super difficult for a really, really long time. And I don't know to what extent this is just kind of fate, but I finally just got to a point where I was like, okay, I guess I can't run anymore. I need to find something else. And within a week of me making that decision and just going, all right, maybe I'll swim, something low impact. Maybe I'll get into biking. Within a week of me making that decision, someone says, I know this chiropractor. And I was like, all right, I'll try it. And I go, and this guy is like the top chiropractor in the San Francisco Bay Area. He teaches at the local chiropractic college. He's really well known, Dr. Paul Walton, in case anyone wants to know. And I go in, and the first appointment, he gives me an evaluation. He looks at me, he says, let's get you back to running again. And I started to cry, because it was like, what? Like, I've had so many people not even know how to just get me out of pain. This guy's saying, let's get you back to running. And ultimately, he rebuilt my foot. That sounds really weird, but basically he set my foot in the proper way, wrapped it really tight and really well, taught me how to professionally wrap my foot to keep everything stable, and then gave me stabilization exercises, namely consisting of standing on one leg on that foot to slowly, over the course of weeks, build up the strength for all the muscles that support the cuboid. And that's what got me back. Sorry, it's a bit of a long story.
No, it's fascinating though, isn't it? Sometimes it's just having one person believe in you and speaking to the right person, because you've obviously tried so many other things and it just hasn't worked. And actually, I think when you said you're using running for stress management, and then you're not able to do that anymore, and it's such a massive change to your lifestyle, an incredibly difficult time period that you went through. How long was that sort of whole period before you managed to get back to running and learn how to strap up your foot?
God, it was at least a year. And it was at least a year. And I didn't get back to running right away. Frankly, I was just so happy to be walking without pain for a while there that once I got connected to Dr. Walton, that it was just like, okay, let me just like get back to walking. Taking a long walk would be a pleasure at this point. And then we get, cue up to a couple years later, we get to like 2011. Okay. And I'm back to running, and I'm doing little 5Ks and 10Ks and things like that. And I get it in my head, I want to run a marathon. And at this point, I understand a lot about, the archaeology of the foot, I guess you could say, and like what sort of symptoms I'm likely to, like what parts of the foot are likely to tighten up right before maybe the cuboid would be the next thing to dislocate. So I'm like good with the, self massage and, and things like that. And I'm training for a marathon, and I push it again. I start amping up my mileage. I'm totally going from the place. This is so perfectionistic, well, if I feel like I could go another mile, I should do another mile. I'm blowing past the 10% rule. Why not? Boom, same foot. I get a stress fracture. And that was just like, no, So I ran a half marathon, but I've never run a marathon to this day, because when I was training for it, I, ended up then getting this stress fracture, and that took like a good 6 to 8 months. And really and truly in 2011 is when I started training. 2012 is when the stress fracture happened. And I got to tell you, the world at large, by the time it, as Oprah says, first it'll throw a pebble at you, and then it'll throw a brick, and then it'll send like a boulder crashing through your life. It was just like, okay, got it. I actually have to relate to my body and listen to my body, because the number of times that I could tell someone a story about times when I didn't listen and I just crashed past what I had built a foundation for, it's just like, how many times am I going to go through this? So what I've really learned is that you know, for sure, what we think we're capable of in terms of athletic performance. And this has been documented in research labs and clinically, that when people say, I've done all I can, there are actually mental blocks that are there. We actually probably only ever, even when we think we're at full capacity, perform at about 80%, because the body has biological mechanisms that will shut you down from actually maxing out at 100% of your potential. So there are mental blocks, but if you have to have a solid foundation underneath. It's like if you have done the training and built the muscles and the neural responses and stabilized your joints and all that to blow past a new PR, great. But if you are just going out there and going, I should be able to run 10 miles today because I think I can, you are flirting with you're flirting with self-destruction. Or at least that's what I've decided for myself.
I think it's really interesting because you've mentioned a couple of words like, perfectionism, wanting to be perfect, linking it in back to control. And then when you're running is, just wanting to blow past the 10% increase in mileage that you should be doing, and just going, you're pushing yourself further, you're going faster, etc. You're training for these big goals. And it almost comes back to that mental side. How do you balance that drive, that ambition, that desire to achieve with ensuring that you are relating to your body, that you are listening to your body?
I just balance it with the listening. And so what that looks like in terms of hard metrics, like assessments that I run through now, and I think that a lot of the things that I'm talking about in many ways are more important than ever now that I'm into CrossFit, because, I think that you really can go out there and just like run more than you're capable of running, and you can be flirting with an injury, but maybe not necessarily. But I mean, if you go into CrossFit and you try to lift pounds that you just are not equipped to lift, you can really throw out something in a really serious way. So what I've learned throughout this entire process, or the metrics that I pay attention to, are things like energy levels. Am I tired? How am I sleeping? I am a huge fan of heart rate monitors. I wear a Fitbit every single day. I pay attention to a spike in my resting heart rate. If I have a spike in my resting heart rate of more than 2-3 beats within one 24-hour period, I notice that. I look at my heart rate variability every single day. I look at things like just how I feel, okay? Like approaching a particular workout. If I'm walking up to a barbell with trepidation, I have to pragmatically acknowledge the fact that something in my body is sending off an alarm signal, and whether it's a fear that I have that is purely about maybe I just can't do this and I'm just afraid, or if it's a fear that I have that is about something deeper, I am not going to perform as well as if I am approaching that bar with more of an open mind and going, okay, let's just see what happens. I am looking at things like enthusiasm for showing up for the next workout, just kind of some of the classic symptoms of athlete burnout, which, are easily Googleable. When an athlete is approaching their next workout and they're just feeling day after day after day, kind of like, all right, here we go. I guess I'll log my time today. This is a sign of overtraining. So I really try to pay attention to those signs of overtraining. I listen a lot more to the people around me, coaches who, if they say, you might want to dial that back a bit, I just go, okay, I got to dial that back. And I check things like form. Form starts to break down when we're tired or when we really aren't optimal. So, if I'm out doing, a run these days and I notice that my head is starting to sag forward and, the tempo of my steps has started to slow down, it's like, okay, something's going on here. I might need to slow down my pace. I might need to take a walking break. I just pay attention to a lot more factors now, instead of just going, it says I'm supposed to do this mileage today, so I have to go do it, because that's what dotting my I's, crossing my T's, and getting my gold star looks like.
I totally agree with what you're saying about, especially about sleep as well. If you're not sleeping, that's a big wake up sign, especially if you're waking up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, something's not going right. I mean, one of the things I'd love to talk to you about is the courage habit. almost in relation to taking that first step. So taking the first step into running, taking the first step into going after a marathon, doing a half marathon, taking the first step into CrossFit. How did you manage that? Because I think a lot of people struggle initially they have these dreams and ambitions, but they don't know how to take that first step. So what would you say around that?
I think there's a multitude of factors. Okay. So first of all, I think, when I talk about courage, people probably are starting to pick up, because I've mentioned my own fear, that I'm not talking about a fearless model. I don't actually believe in fearless. I think everybody feels fear. It's just some of us learn skill sets for how to become more resilient when we face fear. And the courage habit is all about, how do we develop a habit of courage? Instead of responding to fear in fear-based ways that have become fear-based habits, and perfectionism is absolutely a fear-based habit, how do we interrupt that habit pattern and then practice habits that build courage and resilience? And in the courage habit, I'm talking about the research behind these resilient habits. So the habits that we need to tap into, instead of getting, constantly recycling our fear-based habits, would be things like accessing the body, listening without attachment, reframing limiting stories, reaching out and creating community. So instead of feeling the fear and going into perfectionism or pessimism or self-sabotage or people-pleasing, we need to go, oh, hold on, I noticed that perfectionism thing again. Let me pause, take a breath, access the body, or reach out and create community, something that interrupts that habit. And when it comes to a first step, I think that, different people have to engage in different ways, but it starts with, what is my fear pattern? Because that's the thing that's going to get people hooked. If we try to run over to what we think is the solution and go, oh, okay, I'm just going to not do this thing that I've been doing for decades, I'm just suddenly going to flip a switch and do it differently, we're kidding ourselves. We're not going to just flip a switch and do it differently. The fear pattern's going to operate unconsciously, or it's going to get us, and then we're going to be like, damn it, it got us again. So that's the thing, is like, how do we notice where it is that we get stuck in the process? And then I think the other thing that we have to think about in terms of getting started is really understanding that anything that we want to learn, anything that is new, fear is just a part of the process. And I tell a story in the Courage Habit actually about getting interested in triathlon for the first time. And I kind of pulled together my courage, I guess you could say, and I headed to the local store that rented wetsuits. And I was like, you know what? I wasn't a great swimmer, and I'd never worn a wetsuit before. I was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try on a wetsuit. And so I had no idea at the time that getting into a wetsuit can be an athletic endeavor unto itself. They can actually be very difficult to get on. And I'm like straining and groaning to get this wetsuit on. And it was just like everything my critic was saying. I feel stupid. What are you even doing here? My body is shaped much more like a CrossFit body, or like Kate Winslet in Titanic, curvy thighs. I'm not like this, really muscular, but yet thin kind of person. I don't have Chrissy Wellington's frame, And so I was just going, maybe I'm not the right body type for triathlon. I don't know. I can't even get the suit on. I didn't know at the time that they just are complicated to get on when you're first doing it. And I just really, it was like this, okay, maybe you're just not a triathlete. But I had been paying attention to my fear and how my fear worked for long enough that I actually caught that moment. Because one thing I know about fear is that anytime it is saying you're just not that kind of person, if it's something that you want, that's a story. So whether it's a creative endeavor or deciding to change careers or whatever the case might be, when your brain or the thought in your brain is telling you, well, you're just not one of those people. You're just not one of those creative people. You're just not athletic. You can't do what Sarah does because, you're not tough. Tough isn't how people would describe you. You have to remember that's a story. That's just a story that's made up because you, Sarah, had to learn to walk and run and do everything that you've done just like everybody else, right? Like you didn't come out of the womb able to hike the Appalachian Trail. You had to learn how to build up your endurance. You had to start at zero. And that's a really powerful thing to realize, is that Everyone starts at zero. I started at zero. Every Olympian you've ever seen, we all start with zero. So if they could do it, why couldn't you do it? And the only thing standing in front of you most of the time is this story. So you got to get into the habit, I think, of listening without attachment to what your fear is saying, and then reframing that limiting story that's saying, oh, this just isn't who you are.
Why was it a triathlon? What drew you to doing a triathlon?
To be kept in check around running injuries. So I started swimming when I got the stress fracture. And when I first started swimming, I'd learned to swim as a kid, but not very well. And when I first got back into it as an adult after the stress fracture, I could not even swim from one end of a 25-meter pool to the other. Like it was like holding onto the wall at one end of the pool and going to the other, and then like holding onto the wall at the other and just like gasping for air. And I was a runner, so I didn't really know how to breathe. I didn't really know how to, I had terrible form, still kind of have terrible form as a swimmer. So it was like, okay, if I swim and I run, I swim and I bike, that will kind of fill this impulse that I have to get some cardio in most days of the week. But it will not cloud my, not cloud. Let me see. What is it I'm trying to say? It was basically just keeping it in check, keeping running in check. I won't be running 5 days a week, but I'll be doing something 5 days a week.
Tell us more about your first half-Ironman. How did it go?
It was hard. I mean, so my first triathlon ever was a sprint. I was kind of like, am I even into this? And I feel very fortunate because I live in Sonoma County, and the gym that I was going to at the time had a spin class. And I just feel so lucky because the person who runs that spin class, Holly Wick, is an age group athlete. She hits the podium on basically every triathlon for her age group around here. She's ranked in the world. I think she's like, at one point I saw she was like 7th in the world or something like that for her age group in the world for half-Ironmans. So she was teaching, and she was just very like, you can do it. You just push through it, So that was really helpful. But she also was combining it with get that foundation underneath. So she was working the mental game, but also teaching me the foundation of strength I needed to have. And then I did, so I did some sprints, I did an Olympic, and then I was like, I want to do a half Ironman. Big, audacious goals are very appealing to me. They excite me. So first half Ironman, the biggest thing that I was saying in the days leading up to it, first of all, I think I went into it overtrained. By the time it finally arrived, I remember standing in the queue to get into the swim was in a river, 1.2 mile swim. And I saw my friend Red, and she was like, oh my God, Kate, it's so exciting. How do you feel your first triathlon? I'm like, yeah, I'm never doing this again. And she was like, you'll do it again. I was like, nope, I'm never doing it again. My whole thing was, get into the swim and, do not quit, do not drown, and do not get kicked in the head. Those were like my kind of goals for the swim. And I just told myself, look, if I can just make it through the swim, I know I can sit on a bike for 4.5 hours. And if I had to walk the half marathon, I could walk the half marathon. So I just set these really low bars. I was totally nervous. And then when I made it through the swim, a lot of my tension disappeared because I was just like, okay, I know that I can sit on a bike for X number of hours. And like I said, if I have to walk the half marathon, I'll walk it. I did not end up walking the half marathon, but it was just kind of like my fail safe. And when I finished, my husband and my then 2-year-old daughter were at the finish line. And I have this video of me crossing the finish line, and my daughter had been waiting out in the hot sun for me most of the day and was in a horrible mood. And it was just kind of like my husband standing there and my daughter like, mommy, and melting down. And I'm just kind of like taking my water, getting my medal. And my husband's like, babe, I'm so proud. And my kid's melting down. And I'm just kind of like, what did I just do? And I did it in like 8 hours and change. Which is a slow time for a half Ironman, but I did it and I was enormously proud.
You did it. You should be proud. And it's not about the time. It's about doing something for you, something that you wanted to do, something that you committed to, something that you trained towards. Mentally, I think it would just be absolutely fascinating if we could be in your head during that race. Did you go into any sort of dark patches? Like, do you, or do you not even allow yourself to get in there? Like, what are you thinking about? How do you keep going when you might want to stop?
Well, stopping was not an option for me. I've never DNF'd a race. I don't ever intend to. I am of the mindset that you finish. I mean, unless a life-threatening injury is there, you finish. When I'm really tired, I start checking form, as I mentioned, because I think that form is one of those things that when it starts to go, then things start to hurt more, and then it drags your spirits down, and then it's like your form goes more, and then it drags you down more, and then, paid attention to fueling. I think that a lot of people who get into dark places during long distance events, a lot of it has to do with fuel and blood sugar and just, and it's very human. It can be difficult to totally gauge what's too much and what's not enough. And you learn through experience, which I had learned through training and through talking to other people over the course of basically a year before I did a half Ironman. And, my mindset was just, we're going to finish. And the half Ironman that I did is in Sonoma County. So I was also trying to do things like on the bike ride, just go, how beautiful it is to be coasting these hills past vineyards, and this is kind of a like not great example in some ways, but when I got to the run, I was about 3 miles into the run, and there was this guy who was running, and he had an actual like Ironman hat on from a previous race he had done. And he was shuffling, and I was running faster than him, which I got to say, like that's a marker, man. If I'm running faster than you, you probably need to like go to the medic tent or something, because I'm not a very fast runner. And he was kind of slurring his words and not totally making sense. And a couple of us were there, and then they ran on, and they said something to me like, oh, that guy doesn't look like he's doing so well. And they kind of ran on, and, he was talking to me, and then I said, you know what? If you want to rest here in the shade, I'll go up to the next, they had like a little drink area, and I'll send someone back to evaluate you. And thankfully he listened. He must have known he was in bad shape. But so he sat down, and I ran on ahead and sent someone back for him. And it was one of those things where it's like when I saw, I could tell I was nowhere near that point, that I wasn't dehydrated. I wasn't low blood sugar. I could tell that I was actually feeling reasonably strong. I was tired, but I was reasonably strong. And that was when I was like, holy shit, I'm going to finish this thing. And the guy, of course, was okay. This would not be a good story to tell if the guy was not okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to talk about setting big, audacious goals. So you set yourself this big, massive goal of doing like a half Ironman. What do you do next to, what's your process of having a big goal? Like, how do you break it down? What steps are you taking? What's your process for making these big goals achievable and actually going out and getting it done?
Okay. So breaking down the goal. All right. Before I speak to that, I just realized there's something I didn't really bring up that was part of, and I can't believe I didn't, that was part of like a huge reason for finishing this half Ironman. So like in between the stress fracture and deciding to do the half Ironman, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And the reason I bring that up at this point is because I that was another piece that was like, I'm finishing this, because it was like, I need to prove to myself that this disease, this diagnosis is not going to control my life. It's not going to beat me. I'm the one who says what it is I'm going to do with my life. So that relates to the big audacious goals. I'm very much an existentialist in that I think that we get a short time on this earth. I'm acutely aware of the fact that like we all die. And instead of finding that like a really scary proposition, I'm like, I want to just suck the marrow out of every experience that it's possible to have. And that's part of why this big audacious goal setting is so attractive to me. Why go do a sprint when I could do a half Ironman? It's like, and that doesn't mean bigger is always better, but it's like, if something's a little bit on the horizon of like that kind of scares me, but also kind of I go, whoa, that's the like sexy, intriguing kind of a point. So that's another piece. And so when it comes to breaking down a big goal like that, something that's pretty big, with triathlon training, I actually would go to pdfcalendar.com and I would print out a blank calendar and I would put the race date, for the half-Ironman on there. I've done 2 now. I put a race date on there for the half-Ironman, and then I would, also slot in my Olympics and my sprints. I would always do some Olympics or sprints as like kind of lead up training. And then it would be, okay, here we go. What do I need to do? If I need to be able to run 13.1 miles on race day, then I'm going to work backwards. I need to be able to run 11 miles by this date, and I need to run 9 by this date, and I need to run 7 by this date, and I need to run 6, but and I just started putting it on my calendar, and then that's what I would do. And I set certain days for certain things, which I found really helpful. So it was like Monday and Wednesday were always running days. Tuesday and Thursday were always a swim/spin brick at the gym. And then Fridays would usually be either my long run day or a long bike day, depending on what I had set for training. And then, of course, the closer I got to the races, the more time I would do swimming and biking at the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And by the time it was a month out from a race, it was like, it's like having a part-time job. And that's actually part of the reason why the switch I've made is over to CrossFit, because training for a long distance triathlon like that, it was a good 15, 20 hours a week of training by the end.
How has being diagnosed with your autoimmune disease changed your life?
Well, it really was, when I said earlier that I've had so many examples of pushing it and really having to go, oh, like this trying to blow past a thing doesn't work. It's changed my life in terms of, for a while, I felt really victimized by it. I really did feel like, I'm taking the medication they prescribe. I still feel tired all the time. What am I going to do? Is this just how it is? I have other family members who have the same disease, so there's probably a genetic component. I was gaining weight, even though I was not overeating or pigging out on, junky foods. And it really became, you might have to bleep this out, but in my head, are you for fucking serious about your life, Kate? Like, it became about intentionality. It became about, am I making it count? It became about, am I living from the cheap seats, or am I actually looking at my life and going, what would uniquely surprise and delight me? And how do I make that happen? And how do I blow past that boundary? So, of course, when I decided to start training for a half-Ironman, what I heard from conventional Western medicine doctors was, that's probably too hard a load for your body. And I would read the stories of people who had been diagnosed with far worse things, who were managing to do half-Ironmans and sometimes even Ironmans. And I would take that as my inspiration. And again, I had to start paying attention to a whole host of other markers, and the paying attention in particular to heart rate variability has been, I feel like, the ace in the hole, because the heart rate variability changes before any other symptom shows up. So it made me take my life a lot more seriously. It made me take my health a lot more seriously. And all these years later, the diagnosis was in 2012, so this is now 2019. All these years later, it's really shown me the power of the mind-body connection, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't have an autoimmune disease. There is no limit in my life, as far as I'm concerned, that shows up. If you ran my blood today, I don't know what would show up. I still take the medication as prescribed, but it's just like, no, I'm going to go do CrossFit. I'm going to run, walk, hike. I'm going to do the things that I want to do with my body, and I am not going to accept the idea that a diagnosis defines who I am.
Yeah, love that. Love that. So you've written this book, The Courage Habit, How to Accept Your Fears, Release the Past, and Live Your Courageous Life. Where did the book come from? How did that come about?
Well, it was originally going to be based on the book proposal that I sold was based on a digital program that I created called the Courageous Living Program. So originally is book proposal. Here's what it's all about. I've already got a digital version of this to the publisher. Are you interested? Publisher says yes. And I started doing more research on habit formation because the book was going to be called The Courage Habit, but initially it was conceived as just like, hey, make courage a daily thing. And then I started to go, well, what does the research say about habit formation? And that led me down the path of looking at the basal ganglia and behavioral habits and psychological courage, which is an actual thing that is studied clinically. And I had this kind of eureka moment when I began studying the role of the basal ganglia in habit formation, because the way habits work in the brain is that there's a cue, routine, reward loop. So you feel something like fear, that's the cue. You go into a routine, which is a response to the cue. And the routine is designed to get you to the reward. And as far as your basal ganglia is concerned, the reward is whatever will decrease stress the fastest. So if I have habituated a routine like perfectionism, and that's what I'm comfortable doing, might not have the best outcomes for me, because as we know, perfectionism wears people down. But if it's my comfort zone, if it's my locus of control, if I'm not paying attention, that's the routine that I'm going to turn to get the reward of feeling in control, or, it being the thing that I know. And I realized that is parallel to a process I had been, working with life coaching clients for years, which was you feel afraid, you dive in anyway, and you transform. And every single time you feel afraid, but you decide to dive in anyway in response to the fear, you get the reward of transformation. And I kind of went, oh my God, these two work together. The more you feel afraid, dive in anyway, and transform, the easier that process becomes over time. We're really talking about habit formation and literally learning the behavioral habit of being more courageous in your life. So these labels of like perfectionism, or, oh, I'm always into self-sabotage or people pleasing, these are just labels that we assign ourselves. You can change this. This isn't how you were born. This can be something that you change. And the more I got into the research, the more excited I got. So I had some chapters due, and I approached my editor and was kind of like, okay, if you want me to just give you chapters based on the Courageous Living Program, which is the book proposal that I sold you, I will totally do that, because that's what I'm contractually obligated to do. But I think I've hit on a concept here that is even better. And I hope you think so. And luckily they thought so, because I was really worried at that point, because I was, under contract. So the Courage Habit became its own totally, wonderful, geeky entity of, how do we practice courage in our lives, and how do we actually stop getting stuck in the fear-based habits and start integrating and becoming more of these courage-based habits.
Absolutely. And it's evolved further, because as well as having the book and the website, you've also got your Courageous Life podcast. Tell everyone a little bit more about what happens on your podcast and why they should tune in.
Well, the Your Courageous Life podcast, I feel like, is this place where, I consider myself a writer at heart, but I would notice sometimes that when I would be very direct in my writing, people would take it in a way that was different than what I had intended. And so I kind of liked the idea of being able to record myself talking about these concepts so that the intention would be carried. And so, for example, I can be very direct. When I said earlier, like, are you taking your life seriously? Are you living from the cheap seats? Are you living with intention? I mean it in exactly the tone of voice that I just gave, which is not like, are you living, life from the, this judgment. I'm not saying it like that. I'm just saying it very directly. Like, really, each of us listening, consider this. And in writing, people would kind of ascribe this harsher tone than I intended. So I began initially the podcast just kind of recording blog posts that I'd already created, but adding a little bit more like context or examples. And I liked the idea that people could hear my voice. And from there, it was like, oh, I actually just really like this as its own separate thing. So now, it's evolved into cultivating topics and people writing in and saying, could you talk about fear as it applies to this? And me going, yeah, I'll do a podcast episode on that. And it's a great deal of fun. So, all kinds of topics, looking at how do we work with the inner critic? How do I know what I really, really want? Goal setting, time management. I actually just did an episode about how I set business related goals for myself for the year and then break that down into quarters and then into months and things like that.
Awesome. Totally love it. So I will make sure that I put the links to your book, to your website, and to the podcast in the show notes, which will be available at toughgirlchallenges.com. But we're going to shake things up now. I'm going to do some quick fire questions. My questions will be quick, but it doesn't necessarily mean your answers have to be quick. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. Are you a morning or evening person?
I'm a morning person.
Ooh, what's your morning routine? What time does your alarm go off?
I don't have an alarm that goes off. I have an alarm that brightens the room. The aim is for 6:30. Sometimes it's not till 7 or 7:15. If I wake up earlier, I meditate right away. If I wake up later, I help my husband with getting our now 5-year-old up and moving and ready to go to school. And then we get her dropped off and then I meditate afterwards.
Love it. What book are you currently reading at the moment?
Oh God, what book am I not reading at the moment? Okay, Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I'm turning around looking at my couch covered with books here. I just finished Learning to Breathe Fire by J.C. Muniz. I might have to correct that. Principles by Ray Dalio. The Making of a Manager by Zhang. Traction by Wickman. Brene Brown, Dare to Lead. Just finished The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. Lots of different books. Books on management, entrepreneurship, leadership, and CrossFit have been my jam lately.
Do you read every single day for a set amount of time?
I don't set a timer, but yeah, I read every single day. Absolutely.
Ooh, I love that. That's epic. Do you have a favorite movie?
Goonies.
Ooh, I love it. What type of music do you listen to?
All kinds. It depends on the mood that I'm in. So when I want to be energized, it's, stuff that's a little more fast-paced, upbeat. Part of my daily routine is to listen to 3 songs in particular: Love, Serve, and Remember by John Aston, Rise by Katy Perry, and Whatever It Takes by Imagine Dragons. I'm all over the place. I'll listen to a little Dixie Chicks. I'll listen to rap. I'll listen to classical. I'm a classically trained musician when I was in grade school and high school. A little bit of everything. Depends on the mood.
What's your favorite piece of kit?
Of kit?
Or gear. Kit or gear.
Oh, gear. Yeah. Oh, gear.
I think I was going to guess it'll be like your Fitbit or your heart rate monitor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If it has to be something that you have to be able to wear, it's going to be the Fitbit for sure. But just like things that go along with this lifestyle, probably be electrolyte tablets.
Ooh, I like it. What is your best tip for stress relief?
To have a daily practice, I think. I feel like I need 2. Okay. So there are 2 of them that are really needed. So I think you have to have a daily practice because you just experience less stress in general when you have some kind of daily practice. It doesn't have to be meditation, but some kind of daily practice where you get connected to yourself. But if I am totally stuck in my stress and all my feelings, my tip, you get a pillow and you scream into a pillow and you cry. Like you let the feelings out. Because there's kind of stress prevention, and then there's once you're in it and you're just like, oh God, it's like you just got to cry it out. That's me anyway.
Do you have like a mantra or quote that you live your life by?
On fire and on purpose.
Final words of wisdom for our listeners out there who want to live a more courageous life. What would you say to them?
You can listen to the stories that your fear tells you, but take responsibility for the fact that you are the one who acts based on those stories. If you listen to this podcast or any other podcast or read a book or anybody you admire and you go, well, they could do it, but I can't do it. That is a story that fear is telling you. And we need to listen to what fear says, because it's a wound and it's usually just trying to protect us in some way, in a short-term kind of way. But in the long term and the gains you want to get in your life, take responsibility for the fact that you are the one who decides if that story is true. You are the one who decides whether or not to take action in the name of what it is that you want.
Oh, Kate, that was so powerful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast to share more about your incredible, courageous life and the difficult challenges that you've faced and have overcome. Kate, where would be the best place for people to follow you, to find out more information, to get your book, to listen to your podcast? Where would you send everyone?
Well, I am Kate Courageous on Instagram. I'm at Your Courageous Life, and my life coach training program is at teamclcc.com.
Kate, thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to that episode with Kate. What an absolute legend. New episodes of the Tough Girl Podcast come out every Tuesday at 7 a.m. UK time. But make sure you hit that subscribe button, as bonus episodes also come out on a Thursday on an ad hoc basis, also at 7 a.m. UK time. So hit that subscribe button, and if you can, tell one friend about the Tough Girl Podcast, because that is the best way to share the message, to increase the amount of female role models in the media, and to encourage other women to get outside their comfort zone, to face their fears, and to take that first step. You can help support the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media by signing up as a patron. patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. You can sign up from $2 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever level that you can afford to pay at. Equally, if you don't want to do a monthly donation, you can just do a one-off donation. If you go and visit toughgirlchallenges.com and scroll to the very bottom, there is a PayPal button where you can send me sterling or US dollars. I actually have to work in both currencies because a lot of my expenses for the website and for the podcast are actually from America. So yeah, both currencies work for me. Anyway, I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you are, whatever you are doing. You can find more information about me, follow along with my journey on Instagram at Tough Girl Challenges. Tough Girl Challenges is on Facebook, and obviously the website toughgirlchallenges.com. Have an awesome day, and I'll be back with you next Tuesday for another fabulous episode. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.